All right, let's get a broad understanding of all the moving parts and their impact on the geopolitical environment. We're joined now by Thembisa Fakude. He is from Africa Asia Dialogues, the Senior Research Fellow there and Director. Good to have you, and thank you very much for coming on this evening. Duty-free access to the U.S. market if we meet certain conditions on the rule of law, on human rights, on labor protections. It's a different world 25 years on than where, for example, Africa was when this agreement was initially signed. So what is the economic benefit today for Africa, but for South Africa in particular, as opposed to what it was 25 years back? Considering, one, for example, the digital technology services are in place. The middle class has tripled, 300 million people now in that range on the African continent broadly. The populations are growing. I think it's 1.3 billion people now on the continent.
Well, I think the benefits are more because we have more and more penetration of the U.S. Goods and market into Africa, which means therefore that there will be a much more larger or higher demand of American products within the African continent. So the demand has certainly increased as many Africans become more and more addicted to American lifestyle and way of life. There was no Netflix, for example, some couple of years ago when they started. There was no WhatsApp when they started. There were all the other new entrants from America into African continent were absent when this was first signed. So in 2023, we have certainly seen more and more goods and services, or American goods and services penetrating and being introduced in Africa. And that means, therefore, that African countries are getting more and more used and, they like to continue consuming American products. So this comes at a very, very right time. I mean, we even had the tone of the union, particularly in South Africa, in terms of their acceptance of the AGOA. They have their conditions in terms of how they see this relationship working. But I think it's good news overall. Of course, it's sad news that Central African Republic, Uganda, Gabon are amongst those countries that Joe Biden has expressed the position that they will be expelled from AGOA. So from that statement, we are certain that South Africa is still going to be part and parcel of AGOA because it wasn't mentioned in that list. So there will be more interaction, I think, and I think it's going to come in as a welcome new addition to Africa-US economic relations.
Does that answer the question? Because there are 4 or 5 questions that were placed before Congress that had to be considered. One was the fact that should the U.S. act now in terms of renewing this or wait until next year? Because, as you know, they are also looking at an electoral year, so there will be a new administration that is coming into play. However, for example, the textile sector would have wanted them to sign it now because they work on a 24-month window. So whatever would be sold in 2025, they need to be guaranteed of those orders this year, and what the investors need to know what it will cost. So does the fact that we've got this announcement around Gabon, Uganda, Niger, Central African Republic indicate that this is one of the issues that I suppose will be a given and no longer on the table for discussion, or at least will be a given in terms of the discussions that, yes, we are renewing this year?
I think there will be discussions on the certain technical matters surrounding the deals that will be signed between the Americans and the African continent, excluding those that are not part of AGOA, including the 3 or 4 countries that have been expelled. But I think the fact that the decision was expressed by Joe Biden, it means that we're on course in terms of South Africa at least being included in the next phase of U.S.-Africa trade relations under the AGOA Pact. So we can be rest assured that that's going to continue. But in terms of negotiations and fine-tuning the negotiations and decisions, that I think is going to be continuing moving forward. And I think most of it is going to happen later this week. But the the next year deadline, which I think that's when the expulsion of the other will come into effect, which is the 1st of January, and the new AGOA will be also on the 1st of January 2025. So that's going to be negotiated continually between the countries involved in AGOA. But I think we can all be rest assured now that South Africa is certainly going to be forming part of that pact moving forward.
Yeah. In 2015, what was seen was almost a cut and paste of existing programs. And there's a sense that it might not necessarily be the same in this particular round of negotiations. That, I mean, definitely South Africa would want an update. They want an expansion on provinces that are involved. For example, I learned today that the Eastern Cape is not involved there because of the issue of the black spot disease, but it's no longer a factor now, and the citrus industry would like the Eastern Cape citrus produce to be included in AGOA, but there are other permutations around what meat South Africa wants to bring into South Africa that is apparently a bottleneck there. So there's an expectation that there will be a more ambitious proposal coming from the U.S. in terms of what they would also like to see, but also there'll be some ambitious retort from the countries that are invited.
No, indeed. It's going to be a pull and push. And it's unfortunate, of course, that this comes at a time when we have the avian flu with the bird flu that we've been incurring and experiencing in South Africa, including the short supply of essentials such as eggs, etc. So this negotiation comes at a particular time, which means, therefore, that there will be a lot of other products from South Africa that will be excluded, which opens up our market to importation of goods, particularly poultry, from the United States of America into South Africa. So we are going to be certainly disadvantaged, but I think negotiations are going to be continuing way past this week when the summit actually does take place in earnest. There will be continual negotiations, and in South Africa, of course, would like to see the expansion of its economic relationship and participation within the U.S. market and vice versa. So those negotiations, I don't think are going to be ones of I'd like to continue for the next tenure of this relationship. And we must expect, of course, that they're not going to be easy, they're going to be hard. But I think what is even more interesting is how the Americans will try and counter the involvement of the China and the infiltration of China's economic relations and participation with the African continents, particularly South Africa. So they will come up with all the charm offensive and, introduce new incentives that will keep South Africa within the fold, so to speak, outside the capture of China, which has since been sending very strong signals in terms of its intentions of dealing with South Africa economically. So this is a good time for U.S.-South Africa relations, not necessarily only Africa relations, because, we've been having challenging times in terms of our international relations with the United States. I think this is the first time that you have a government-to-government negotiation at this level. And, of course, business always translates into politics and international relations. Yeah. So the successes that will come out of this, one hopes, of course, that will also add and improve the relations that have since soured between ourselves and the United States.
Quite interesting that you bring the question of China, because one of the questions that was being considered by Congress is the trade capacity building and trade facilitation involvement. In other words, infrastructure, roads, energy, and so on and so forth. That should this also be a part of the AGOA agreement? Now we know how China has been involved, particularly on the continent, in assisting countries to rebuild their infrastructure. Are we likely to see a competition for that?
Well, I think that horse is long bolted. I mean, China is coming with the hear no evil, see no evil economic and foreign policy participation in relations with Africa. In other words, they've just, come in, lock, stock, and barrel and invested in this country without really a number of conditionalities being imposed or implemented between China and its trading partners in Africa, whereas the United States has got a lot of conditions. One case in point, the reason why Uganda, for example, is expelled is because of its position on LGBTQ plus community, and also it's because of its position that is taken regarding the second-hand clothing, which likely has been for the past couple of years been imported into Uganda from the United States. So that position of Yoweri Museveni on those two issues have led to Joe Biden making this decision that they're going to expel them out of AGOA, whereas China has not really been interested in all of these socio-political issues that we continue to see and experience in Africa. So that's the two difference. That's a big difference between what China has been doing in terms of its relationship with Africa and what the United States has been doing in terms of its relationship with Africa. The United States has been much more strict in terms of its conditions in doing business with Africa, whereas China has, looked the other way during its, relationship, or the time that it has had a relationship, both economically and politically, with the African continent.
Thembisa Fakude, I appreciate your time. Thanks so much for coming on Africa Asia Dialogue Senior Research Fellow and Director there with us.